much. Before we get started, we just want to start with a land acknowledgement as well. In Nova Scotia, all of us are coming from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people. These territories here were covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, and they did not deal with the surrender of land and resources, but they actually recognized Mi'kmaq title and established rules for what was supposed to be an ongoing relationship between the nations. As treaty people, it is our responsibility to uphold these treaties and work towards decolonization and truth and reconciliation. As I'm sure some of you are aware, today is also Red Dress Day. It's a day where we remember the murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. We must keep calling for justice and change because one person lost is too many. It's also important for us to continue to learn about residential schools and their intergenerational impacts. For those of us who are here today as colonizers and immigrants, I encourage you to use this link I'm about to send in the chat here to learn about the closest residential school to where you live. Take a moment to do that search. I'll give us a second now. Look at where it was. How close was it to where you live? Look at when did it close? It's important for us to learn our history so that we can work towards change in the future. I do ask though, because of the ongoing trauma these schools have caused, not to respond in the chat. Just take that moment now to reflect and to learn, and to continue to reflect throughout today about the ways in which our school system in Canada has been used to create immense and lasting harm. So I'll give us just a minute to do that here and to reflect. So I invite you to keep reflecting on that as we move through our conversations today, this week, and in our work. And with that, it's also necessary that we acknowledge and work to change the ways that our school systems have and continue to perpetuate colonialism and the erasure of Indigenous knowledge, histories, and culture. I also ask that we keep in mind as we continue forward in our work today and moving forward to remember that Indigenous youth and their families face many, many additional barriers to inclusive education. And with that, as we talked about yesterday, we need to listen, learn, and shift the work we do to reflect that and to make it truly inclusive of everyone. So before we continue on, I'm just going to leave another moment of silence for us to just pause and reflect on what that means for our work and for our conversations today. All right, thank you, everyone. Before we dive into things, I'm realizing I should probably introduce myself. I'm Rachel Sparling. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the coordinator for Access Acadia at Acadia University in Nova Scotia. So the purpose of this session is really a chance for us to share our experiences and ideas in a way that will help support the growth and improvement of each school's inclusive post-secondary education option. We'll have some time where the Nova Scotia schools are able to share some of our experiences with you folks and some of our lessons, and for you to share yours as well back with us, and to share those perspectives as educators, facilitators, coordinators, parents, students, or any other lens that you're joining us with today. We're going to start off with an introduction to the schools. You'll get to hear a bit about the history of inclusive education in Nova Scotia and what each of our initiatives are doing. From there, we're going to move into some breakout groups. We'll be able to have some more in-depth conversations. And then once that wraps up, we'll come back to a larger group discussion so we can explore some ideas, do a question and answer, whatever kind of direction that takes us in. And I also am aware that this is the start of the day for most folks here. Nova Scotia, we're a little bit into the day now. But before we get into things, I do want to give us a quick moment to ground ourselves in this space and to do a quick check-in. So just in the chat box over on the side there, I want you to share in 1 or 2 words, if you're comfortable, how you're feeling today and what you're looking forward to most today or this week. However, when you type it, don't send it yet, just leave it there. We're going to send it all at once everyone's had a chance to type. So that's how you're feeling today in 1 or 2 words. and what you're looking forward to most this week. I'll give us all a second to do that. All right, so if you've had a chance to type it, we're going to send it in the count of 3. If you're still typing, that's all good. You can send it after as well. All right, so everyone ready? 1, 2, 3, and hit send. So yeah, let's just take a moment to look through the different things you're seeing from everyone, how people are landing. I'm seeing a lot of people who are feeling really excited, looking forward to things. Yeah, there's a lot of positive energy in this. This is great. And some people who are feeling off today are feeling a bit tired, and that's absolutely okay too. So just as we move forward in this, just remember to check in with yourself as to where you're coming from. When we're feeling different things, we come in with different energies and tend to come at our work in different ways. So just keep that in mind and just be okay with wherever you're at. And also remember that others are coming from different feelings and places today. So they may be coming from different perspectives as well because of that. So thank you folks for indulging me in that for a second. I think it is a great way to get ourselves grounded in our space. So before we dive into things, I just kind of want to lay some like ground rules slash guides to make sure that we're all able to come into the space comfortably in whatever way works best for us. So the first one is I want to encourage you, if you feel comfortable, leave your camera on. It is really great for engagement and conversations. That being said, we're super aware that it is not very comfortable and it's not accessible for a lot of folks for a variety of reasons. So feel free to turn your camera on or off as you feel is best for you. And if that means your camera is going to be off the entire time, that's absolutely okay. Do what's going to make you feel most comfortable in this space. We're also going to ask folks to just stay muted unless you're actively sharing in that moment. It just makes it easier so we're not getting echoes from people's mics and voices, and we're not getting background noise. So just makes it easier for folks to be able to be present and listen. I also invite everyone to share in ways that works best for you. And as Arden mentioned, there's different ways you can do this. There's the Facebook reactions. I can throw one of mine up. There's different ones. I like this one. It's super cute, little celebration. There's different ones for you to work with from there. You can also share in the chat. And we'll also be using Jamboards, which I'll explain in a second, as another way for you to share and contribute if you'd like to. With that, we have some really amazing volunteers with us today who are going to be acting as note takers and harvesters. So they'll be taking jot notes on what folks say so we can gather the learnings, and they'll be posting those on the Jamboards, which again, I'll get into in a second. That way we have those as a way for us to look back on our learnings, and we can refer to those about conversations or ideas we want to look into later or continue having throughout the week. As well, if at any point you're someone who's not comfortable in like jumping into a conversation out loud, you kind of need to be invited in. That's absolutely okay. If you want to say something but don't know where to cut in, you can add a little asterisk into the chat, so those little stars on the A key, and just send it in like I just did there. That'll let us know whether we're in the breakout groups or the large group as facilitators that you want to speak but may not jump in yourself, and so we'll be mindful to try to bring you into the conversation. The reason we're doing that for folks who may be comfortable with like jumping into the conversations is that Zoom's like this really awkward, weird space where it's harder to read body language. It's harder to get a sense of, is someone else jumping in? You have those, you both unmute at the same time. It can be really stressful for folks. So this is just a way for people to be able to jump in however they feel comfortable. And we will also be harvesting from the chat as well. So if you only want to contribute through there, that's absolutely okay. Your voice is still going to be heard and still going to be reflected in our gatherings. So that's a lot of information. So I know folks are probably excited to get into this and start hearing from the Nova Scotia schools. So I'll invite them to do that in a second. The folks you're about to hear from are also going to be facilitating today's session. So you'll see them in the breakout rooms and in the main group at the end as well. And with that, I think I'm going to pass things off to Dr. Mary Sweetman to talk to us about Access Acadia.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and thank you all for having us and allowing us this space and time to be able to do this workshop. I'm going to talk about Access Acadia, which is our initiative at Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. But in order to do that, I'll also give the context of inclusive post-secondary initiatives in Nova Scotia and where that started. So sort of a very brief history, which really starts in 2009, when a visiting professor from the University of Regina came to Acadia and spoke to Dr. Lynn Aylward about their program at the time. And I don't know too much about it now, but I understand that at the time it was called Campus for All, and maybe in the chat you can let me know if it is still called Campus for All. It might be. And that really sparked in Lynn Aylward, who's a phenomenal faculty member here at Acadia, the idea to start something like that in Nova Scotia at Acadia. And synergies happen around access and around inclusive post-secondary education. And what happened next was that the Department of Education actually contacted Lynn. So Lynn didn't contact them, they contacted her to say, we would like to explore more inclusive post-secondary options in Nova Scotia. Would Acadia want to start this? And so it felt really right for Lynn to take this on. And so in 2010, she started doing this research collaboratively with 4 organizations in Nova Scotia that represent different groups, including the Department of Education, the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board, which is the school board in our area at Acadia, the Nova Scotia Association for Community Living, People First Nova Scotia, and the Nova Scotia League for Equal Opportunities. So all of these organizations, including a research assistant, which was Cynthia Bruce, who some of you may have met in the past, as she was one of the faculty leads of Access, who's now gone on to another university. But some of you would have met her at different symposiums in the past. But between Lynn and Cynthia, they were commissioned by the Department of Education in Nova Scotia to do a research study to see about the viability of starting inclusive post-secondary education in Nova Scotia. So after all of that, in 2012, we accepted our first student into Access Acadia. And since then, we've had around 3 to 5 students each term participating in different programs, mostly, well, actually all over the map, but mostly feeling really at home in community development, kinesiology, environmental and sustainability studies. Those have been favorites over the years, but certainly our students take courses in all different fields and disciplines. What I think makes our initiative unique, or at least in Nova Scotia makes it, our initiatives maybe unique. This is what I'm interested in hearing about today, is that we have faculty leads, or their leads within the institution, so that we don't have a separate or another organization running the initiative. So Access Acadia is situated within the Department of Community Development, which is my department, which I teach in. And through that, the student connects with us, and then we are able to get them admitted to the program through, not necessarily through community development, but sometimes that is the program that they situate themselves into. So it is, there's a faculty coordinator, myself, and then Rachel Sparling is the coordinator. So the two of us are really on our own. And then we hire students, Acadia students, to help in multiple ways with different aspects of the initiative. So that is Access Acadia in a nutshell. And I'm happy to answer any questions once we get into the breakout rooms or throughout the time, but I'll leave it at that. And I'll pass it over to Mount St. Vincent University, which was the next joining university in inclusive post-secondary. So over to you. And the two of you perhaps could also introduce yourselves when you come on.
Hi, thank you, Mary, for the little handover. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm not sure where my colleagues are. They're somewhere hidden in the big gallery of pictures. So I am. I've been asked to talk for and about the Mountability program at Mount St. Vincent University. So as Mary said, we started about 5 years when Access Acadia reached out to us and said, we would like to see this initiative expand across the province. and we thought you might be the next good fit to continue expanding on it. So we have currently officially 6 students. The pandemic made some of them desist for the time being because we have only online classes this year. So some of them paused because they felt like this is not for them. But generally we have 6 students that have, we have enrolled over the years. The first of our folks should graduate soon, but because they wanted to cross the stage, not only virtually, but in person, we have held off with it right now so that the pandemic doesn't, make these plans moot. So yeah, so we have our 6 folks. We're working in the same principle and the same funding as Access Acadia does. We have a little bit of a different structure in our program. Is housed between student services and the Faculty of Education. And we have a faculty advisory committee and our staff advisory committee, which is comprised of several faculty members out of education, history, child and youth studies. And I think that's it for now. And the student undergraduate advisor and accessibility services. So out of that pool, there's always one main faculty advisor that, and I'm doing this right now for this year. And we have a student coordinator, and I don't know, she should be somewhere on the call as well, Stephanie. So yeah, so we tried to build up a bit more capacity in our university because we felt like between so many people going on sabbaticals, leaves, moving around, that we wanted to have a good basis, a good foundation, so that the program doesn't die with someone leaving or someone having to leave or go on mat leave, sabbatical leaves, whatever other things might come our way. Maybe just a few highlights in terms of, so our students have been taking courses across the board in all of we're not a big university, but we have a very, we have small, tiny little departments that are mighty. And so our students have a variety of options of courses that they can take inside of that. We also have a lot of things going on extracurricular on campus, and that's probably one of the highlights for our program because we have students that have really taken up their space as soon as they landed on campus, started to participate. And these were not things that we really had foreseen, things that just they saw them and they started to be part of them. So we have one of our students who actually is on student council, who ran for elections, etc., and actually who was the interim president of the student council for a few months even. We have a student who's very interested in art who participated in we have a little art gallery with exposition. So she has been able to exhibit some of her work in that art gallery. We have other students who have, volunteered in the library, students that have taken up research assistantships with us. So there's a good deal of variety of things that happened outside of the regular course offerings that were, I think, as surprising to us in the end as they have maybe been to themselves, because as I said, like this showed really to me, what the possibilities are as soon as you open up participation, access to university learning. People are taking up the space and are there and become part of campus life and the campus community, and that has been really super rewarding to just see and be part of. So yeah, so that's kind of on my end for now. And I think I can hand it over to Jacqueline, who is representing the 3rd program that we have in the province now, and is the youngest of the 3 sister programs. So Jacqueline, do you want to take over?
Yes, thank you, Connie. I like being referred to as the youngest, even if it's just about the program. So I'm Jacqueline Cote, and I'm the manager of accessible learning at Cape Breton University. And Eleanor Maga, I don't know if you can see Eleanor there or not, is the program coordinator for our initiative. So CBU Inclusive developed when a parent approached President Dingwall at CBU and asked why there wasn't an inclusive education initiative. So the president arrived in my office to ask if it was something we could do. That was a surprise. And so shortly after that, I had been thinking about this and trying to think of how we would go about it. And then a funding opportunity sort of came through my inbox for the Youth Day program grants through the Department of Community Services with the province. And I wasn't aware of the programs at Acadia and the Mount, and like sort of cursory searches hadn't brought it up. So then with assistance from a parent, the parent who originally approached the president, I drew up a proposal and submitted it, and it was accepted. So we got the funding. So then next thing we had to come up with the program, which was well laid out in the proposal. But interestingly, just about that time, the parent, who's Dr. Lynn Levash, she joined the education faculty at CBU. So so we were able to launch CBU Inclusive in the fall of 2019 after we hired a program coordinator. And very interestingly, the model was, although it was independently thought of, was really in line with what Acadia and Mount St. Vincent was doing. And when we let post-secondary accessibility services know that we had gotten this funding through another avenue, then they invited us sort of into the fold. They were like, hey, we have these other 2 universities who are doing this, let's all have a meeting. And that's kind of how this network in Nova Scotia began. So that's me.
Thank you.
Brighton University.
Yeah, and so just to kind of bring it full circle is that, as Jacqueline said, we then had a meeting, all 3 of our universities, and at this time the Mount and Acadia had been working closely together for many years, and we were under funding from the Department of Labor and Advancement, and still continue to do that. So our initiatives as the 3 universities are still funded through the Department of Labor and Advancement. And over the last year, we've really started to try to meet and talk about what does a network look like of inclusive post-secondary, kind of, and that really came from our learning and our engagement with Alberta and BC over the last few years, and seeing how important it is to have a connection between the universities, and how much learning and advocacy needs to be done between the universities and for all of our institutions, and hopefully to grow. So it's only 3 of our institutions right now, but the hope is that all of the universities would join us eventually. And that really is one of the big pieces from today is to get advice and to do some reflection on what has worked and where you would help us with kind of developing that network. So I'll pass it back over to Rachel, but I'm sure in our smaller groups, when we're talking, we can dig in more to just the kind of how we run our initiatives and how everything works. So, but I'll pass it back to Rachel.
Awesome. I think, sorry.
Sorry, I just, too many things. I have my little one in the back because we are doing homeschooling these days. Nova Scotia is in lockdown, so lots of things to juggle at the same time. I just wanted to add one quick thing, which was a new thing that happened also this year to us as a network. Actually, Labor and Advanced Education is not only funding the program, but actually also agreed to pay the tuition fees for our students, which is a new thing, which came as a surprise because we had been, looking over the years into funding and how to support students that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, because as probably similar in other provinces, your student loans and so on are not really available to our students. So it came a little bit as a surprise. All of a sudden they said, well, we might as well pay for the tuition fees for the students. I think it's part of a movement. Currently, there's a few universities now that are waiving tuition fees for students coming out of care. So I think it's part of a movement to actually look at how to make, generally speaking, university more accessible to vulnerable groups. And yeah, so this has been a very positive little step, and shows also the commitment of, you know, of actually the department, which has been very positive on that end.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for adding that in. It is really exciting that that's happening. I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunities that come from it. So before we head into the breakout rooms here, I do want to just briefly share with you folks one of the tools that we'll be using for you to be able to share your thoughts, and our note takers will be using as well to help gather what folks share. So I'm going to quickly switch to gallery view so I can see people for a second. By a quick show of hands, who here has used Jamboards before? Your hands can be virtual or real, whichever works. Okay, so we actually have a decent number of people. That's really exciting. And for those of you who aren't familiar, don't worry, we're going to do a really quick crash course right now that'll only take 2 minutes. It's a pretty intuitive system, which is really great. So I'm just going to quickly pull it up here and share my screen so you can take a look at it. All right, can everyone see the screen here? Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, so yeah, this is basically what Jamboards is. Each breakout group is going to have their own Jamboards. We're not having 40 something people all adding onto one. So we'll be one for about every, I think it's probably 8 to 10 people or so in each group. I'm not sure, math is not my strong suit. And so there's different tools you can use on the side here. For the sake of ease today, I'm going to ask that we just stick to the sticky notes here, just because if we're adding in a bunch of drawing and other things, it's going to get pretty complicated for our note takers to be able to keep things sorted and take their own notes as well. So what you do to use that is you just go over to the side, click where it says sticky note here. This will pop up. You can have fun, change up the colors, just go with your favorite one. And then you can type out whatever you want. So you can do a little hi, how are you? Maybe that's one of the conversations that comes up. And it creates this little sticky note that pops over to the side here. You can then make it smaller or bigger depending on how many sticky notes are on the page, or if it's something you want to group things around. If you want to edit it and change what you wrote, just double click, that'll pop up. And then if you want to delete it, you can just click the little button there or click delete on your computer. In each of the groups, there's multiple pages. We kind of have them organized right now based on potential topics that might come up from the questions that we shared with folks in advance. These are guides. Don't feel like you have to stick to them, but they're just something that's there to help our note takers keep things organized and keep on, yeah, just organize things a bit. Different ones will look slightly different. Our note takers did tweak things to suit how they want to take their notes. So for example, this one has this really funky idea parking lot, which I love. And so that may be something that's in some groups, but not in others. So when you join the group, just feel free to scroll through and see what's there. The note takers will send the links to your Jamboards once you get into the breakout group. If you want to do quick navigation, you can always click that little arrow right there and then just scroll through that way. So I know that was a lot. That was a super quick crash course. So feel free as you're having the conversations to try that out as well. Just trying to see where we're at here. Yep, and so that's, like I said, that's where our note takers are going to be taking their notes and organizing thoughts. And the goal, hopefully, is, if this is okay with Arden, to share these with you folks later on. That way you'll be able to go back to whatever conversations you have to reflect on them or to engage with those ideas later as well. With that, we'll be moving into our breakout groups here in a second. We'll be in them for about 30 minutes or so. Double checking with Arden, but I don't believe they'll be recorded, correct? It's just the main rooms?
Yeah, there won't be any recordings in the breakout.
Okay, perfect. So I don't know if that helps some folks feel a bit more comfortable having these conversations, or yeah, just there'll be other ways that we'll be recording things through Jamboards so the conversations won't get lost. There will be a facilitator and a harvester / note taker in each of these breakout conversations. They'll be helping guide things, and they'll introduce themselves to you when you head off into the room, so you'll get a chance to meet them there. I'm not sure if all the folks saw, but there were some questions that were sent out in advance for today's session. If you had a chance to look through those and reflect, that's awesome. If not, don't worry about it. This is a conversation and we'll just go with wherever things take us. Each person, though, will be invited to respond to the first question that was sent out, which I believe was, if you could distill what you've learned over the years into 2 sentences, what would it be? The purpose of that is really just to be able to have a bit of an icebreaker so everyone can share their thoughts, we can get ideas going. That being said, if you really don't want to say that out loud, if you don't want to answer the question, that's absolutely okay. Engage with us however you want to. Just let us know by saying either pass or messaging pass in the chat box so we know not to kind of bug you about answering. With that, I think we're pretty good to go. Does anyone have any questions before we head out into the breakout rooms? All right, great. And if anything does come up where you have questions, you have amazing facilitators in every room, so you'll be able to check out them as well. And with that, I think we're good to head out. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you're able to have some good discussions in your groups. And in ours, it felt like we didn't have enough time. I think that's where these breakout rooms always go. Unfortunately, it's what we're working with, and there's still time for us to have some conversations towards the end here as well. So they're definitely not stopping. Just let me pull up the next Jamboard, but I'll get to that in a second. So yeah, before we move into these large group conversation that we're going to have, I would like to invite our note takers just to take a second here to share what highlights came out of your conversation, or just to do a quick share back with everyone. So with that, Tinika, you're on my screen first, so I'm going to invite you in.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So I was with Breakout Room D, and we had some really phenomenal conversation facilitated by Jacqueline. Thank you, Jacqueline. And there were a lot of really interesting themes that came out of our conversation. I think a lot of discussion around successes, a lot of side conversations and questions too coming out of it, which was fantastic and offered opportunity for clarification on what different initiatives are doing and how that might look. And so some of the things or themes that came up, common learnings, are that building connection and personal relationships is key with students. There's a lot of learning in the community that needs to happen for inclusive post-secondary to be successful. So a lot of discussion on changing perspectives. And we also had some really great discussion too about co-ops and focusing on being inclusive to students first, and then including the wider community as well, and seeking allied organizations. Jacqueline, if there's anything that I missed, feel free to pop it in the chat or let us know, but thank you for the great discussion, everyone.
Awesome, thank you, Tinika. I'm gonna throw it to Janine, you're next on my screen.
Perfect. Yeah, I was in discussion group A, and same, we had a lot of really great discussions happening. One of the common themes that came up with us was just the importance of staying true to inclusive values and what that looks like, and realizing that the students that we're working with are human and want to learn and grow just like all humans do, and the importance of like listening and asking questions, and also the importance of supporting students who have complex and significant needs, and doing that right from the beginning and having that as a foundational value, because it's harder to do once you're already established, to kind of then open it. And then along those lines, there was also discussion around the importance of being flexible and not getting yourself limited through memorandums of agreement or whatever it is that may limit you, but trying to find ways to be flexible and really allow yourself and your program to grow. Yeah, I think that's the main. And then the other important thing that we talked about was the importance of networking with employment as well. So the fact that faculty often have a lot of connections, and through that can kind of work with students to connect them to employment opportunities that meet their interests and go with their strengths as well. And if I missed anything, feel free to add it into the chat.
Awesome, thank you so much. Up next, I'm going to throw it over to Sam.
Hi. So we had a really good conversation. I'm very grateful I got to sit in. I was in discussion group C, and from what I got out of it is majority of the conversation really went around getting to know the families and the relationships. So I talked about some cool things of how they really like hearing the family needs and then using the family needs and going from there. There was also a conversation about what it looks like after university and tools that you can set up in place to help the students know what life is going to look like so they don't lose the skills that they've learned throughout the experience they've had. Some other things was about reflecting on themselves. So, as a facilitator, what it's like to be open, acknowledge biases that you may have, continue throughout the experience reflecting on yourself and the opinions you have. And a lot of the highlights surrounded around looking at the relationships and the outcomes through the pandemic. It was like some people got invited to weddings from friends from like a couple years ago. Which was really nice to hear. Employment opportunities. And then there was some reflection on the provincial initiatives and how one of the things was don't keep yourself boxed in to like one group, like find your allies, know who your allies are that aren't going to set up barriers for you, but also allow yourself to work outside of that. So reach out to different departments you may not have reached out to originally in your head and just kind of keep yourself open. If I missed anything, anyone jump in. I do my best to sum it all up.
I personally think you nailed it. That was very much what we talked about. So thank you. Okay, I'll throw it over to Sanford.
All right, so we focused on co-op and talking about the value of co-op and how it can look in inclusive education programs. And it was some of the common themes were that the values of co-op for students in inclusive education programs are very similar to the values of co-op for any student, and therefore we should be investing in them as much as we would for any other student. So they're useful for all students for networking, skill building, and goal setting. One of the particular points that we focused on was advocating for students' own goals and being creative in achieving them. So not prescribing what a student's going to be doing, letting them get their own experience, decide what they want to do, and then being creative in building those support networks so that they can reach those goals or so that they can get that experience and then change those goals if they want to. So being as open as possible with these students' opportunities. By engaging students as much as possible in school groups, such as either being a TA in a class, joining clubs, joining co-op, anything, either student organized or running on the university, that tends to give students a lot more opportunity to figure out what they enjoy and build relationships and build friendships and connections and stuff that can last either through COVID or can provide opportunities and reference letters later. And then we talked about partnering with local organizations who would be interested in engaging with students to sort of drum up opportunities for them to work in co-op with organizations that they'd be interested in. We also discussed a little bit about how to build community connections through COVID, and the consensus was that it's difficult, but student groups that are focused on common interests are often a good way to build connections. There were some examples of people hanging out in the student union building, people bringing guest speakers in, where that really brought students out to engage. Students were volunteering and joining interest-based organizations such as religious groups, LGBTQ2S+ groups, video game groups, political groups, sports teams, etc. Yeah, I'm just looking over the rest of the notes, seeing if I missed anything. There's some really good examples of practicums and co-ops working at the University of Manitoba and also in BC. And yeah, I think that's just about everything. We got lots down. I'm just theming stuff right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Up next is Lisa.
Great. So I was in breakout room E, which was facilitated by Eleanor. And we started out kind of by talking about students as an individual and how they're all on their own path and the importance to create opportunities to build meaningful connections. to also find communication methods that work for the students, redefining success in terms of the student, and engaging in continual reflection. And then we moved on to talking a little bit about co-op opportunities and employment opportunities. And the main points there were that it's important to focus on paid co-op, and for students to experience a work environment, to find out what they like, what they don't like, to focus on resume building, building routines as well. And also through co-op to partner with other organizations to create new programs such as local businesses. And then we moved on a little bit to talking about what the dream for future of inclusive education would be. And the main theme was that students would be able to access funding for those who needed it, and to, in general, remove financial barriers for students, so that they're able to apply for scholarships, bursaries, loans, and that they can get the support they need during the program and also after graduating. Also, the importance of experiential learning was talked about quite a bit, and that it's important it's accessible for all students to be able to enrich these programs. The final point was that students should be able to come to campus with their own support staff, as this can be easier for students rather than relying on supports from the university. If I missed anything, you can feel free to add it in the chat. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Lisa. And then last but not least is Sarah.
Hello. So I was in focus group F that was facilitated by Dr. Mary Sweetman. And we also had a fantastic conversation and echoed a lot of what was already said. But definitely we talked a lot about the importance of relationship building with the students in the program, as well as their families, but also especially trying to find ways to facilitate natural relationships between the students in the Access program and their classmates as well. We also talked a lot about capacity issues and how to address this. And there was some really interesting discussion comparing the discrepancies between the staff to student ratios between provinces, and just the limitations imposed by how many students you can physically support given the resources you have and the number of staff you have. We also talked about the importance of benchmarks and the need to constantly evolve and change these benchmarks, but also the challenges that sometimes arise in trying to meet these benchmarks as well. We also talked about kind of coming back to relationships, that these relationships don't just stay within an academic focus, but also extend to broader aspects of life. So as other note takers have discussed, it goes into employment and family and friends and the social aspect of university as well. And all of those are equally as important. So trying to shift away a little bit from having a sole focus on the academic side to encompass, everything else that comes with being a university student and that whole experience. And then the other thing we talked about was just the importance of constantly developing a critical mind and but trying to be always aware of that. And then lastly, oh, Mary said we lost. Am I back again?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Was I gone for a while?
I think we just missed your last bit of your last point, but you keep going.
Okay. And then also the importance of connecting to others in the field to have that support, especially when you're working in a kind of limited capacity or it's just maybe one or two people. And then lastly, the importance of having a vision for the student and their family to really, for the success of the student overall. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that amazing summary, and to everyone else and for all our note takers. Really appreciate you stepping up to help out with this. It's amazing. So we're going to head into some large group conversation here in a second. And this is really going to be a bit of an open floor for the Nova Scotia schools to put out questions to the group, for you to ask questions as well, or share ideas that you'd like to chat about. For this one, because as I'm sure you can see, there's about 45 of us in this group. That's a lot of people for a conversation. So what we're going to do, as I mentioned at the start, there's an asterisk method of being able to cue yourself for conversation. So for this one, if you want to share at any point or ask a question, share a thought, you're just going to use that little the asterisk like on your A key, and just send it in the chat like I did there. That way we just know that, oh, this person wants to speak next, and we'll be able to create that space for you to do so. If there's something you want to say, but you don't want to say it out loud, but you do want us to say it out loud for you, like a question or a statement, feel free to just put that asterisk next to whatever it is you want us to say. That way we're able to get that out loud for you as well. During this time, yeah, so you can ask things out loud or in the chat, like I mentioned. We're also going to be having a Jamboard for this session as well. So we'll have a note taker. I believe, Lisa, you volunteered to help us out with that. So she's going to be our amazing note taker for this. And I'll share the link to this one in a second. It'll be really similar to what we did in the breakout groups with the Jamboards. So if you want to add to that, you absolutely can. The pages are ordered a little bit differently. So feel free to look through if you want to add something to there just to see where it might fit in best. And with that, I think we're good to head into the large group conversation. We may just throw it to the Nova Scotia schools to get the ball rolling and see if there's something they really want to dive into.
I can get
maybe, oh, sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Go ahead, Connie.
I was just thinking it was because actually we ran out of time, and we because we were just starting to speak about relationships and how friendships have been forming under COVID, and how or how they have been how to say it, surviving or not surviving under COVID, the campus relationships between the students and, and staff and other students and, peers and so on. And yeah, we kind of got interrupted with that conversation. And I find that was a very promising, rich start that we had. So I was wondering if we can kind of, kind of get a picture on, how this year has been for the programs, for the people, for where the obstacles, where are we, where are we gonna have to pick up the pieces when this is subsiding. Kind of some, maybe, I'm sure lots of you have thoughts about this experiences made this year, and yeah. I think we have Trevi who raised her hand in the chat.
Go for it.
Hello. Yeah, so one of the things that we've done a little bit differently is that we've allocated additional hours to our tutors, so our campus life staff who work directly with our students, just to kind of bolster up that social support kind of connections that are needed. So our tutors are spending extra time with our students outside of tutoring sessions. So this might be like meeting online for lunch or coffee. It might be things like meeting online to play a game or to watch a YouTube video, or they might meet in the park for social distancing hangouts or walks. So those are the types of things that we've really kind of implemented, in addition to, making, having opportunities for them to engage in, maybe student groups if they have some type of online meeting, or, book clubs that take place online. So we're trying to find additional ways to increase the social connections that our students are experiencing on campus. But one thing that I'll point out that's quite interesting is that if you think about it, we just went through are going through a very large experiment where we're actually determining, is academics enough to sustain post-secondary inclusive education programs. And what we found out at the Campus Life program that it is, while it's not optimal to just have kind of mostly the focus being on academics, and a lot of students really appreciate, enjoy, and want that social connection, it is enough to sustain the program. We maintained our full we have 8 students in the program. We maintained our complete enrollment, and we had 3 students who were on pace to graduate this year and were able to declare intent if they were interested in graduating. However, they've decided to continue on for another year because, a lot of their day programs have shut down. A lot of their supported employment agencies have shut down, those types of things. And they feel that, being a part of the university community, being able to continue on with their classes is an important thing for them. So one of the things that we've learned is that, while it's not optimal to have kind of these, lesser social connections during the time of COVID, it is sustainable through just the academic portions being kind of the main component alone, as we're seeing right now. Thanks.
Cool, thank you. And I think we have Charmaine like to say something.
Hi. Yeah, one piece that I think, just building off of maybe the reflections of COVID, I think COVID has also shown us that, when we end up in situations where work is stripped away, school stripped away, the things that I think create a bit of like that normalcy or structure of the day relationships has really been what's sustaining most of us. And I think for students that's probably been true also, or we've seen the absence of relationships where students have not necessarily experienced a difference of, if you're not on campus and you are already lonely, being at home and isolated might not have negatively impact people further. And I think it's really helped us understand that in our practice, prioritizing relationships has to be like almost at the top of the work that we're doing, because we could be in this position for another year where campus is a hybrid model. Hopefully not. But what we have seen is, mental health struggles, all of those other pieces that do continue to increase in the absence of relationships and connectivity. And I think on our team in Alberta, what we've been really trying to do is to prioritize how can we capitalize on social connections and relationships with people despite this, and not waiting until the pandemic is done, because by then that could be 2 years. And if a student just started last year, their first 2 years might be fully online. And I think all students in general are kind of in this position of, wanting some connection and wanting to connect with peers or classmates, whether it's through, study groups or group work or things like that. So we've been just taking lots of space to really think about how does that shift our priorities, and seeing this kind of firsthand, how it can impact students that we're including.
Thank you. And up next we have Lauren.
I think you're muted, Lauren.
Thank you. Just to build on that, I think we had sort of a similar experience here, where for us and our reflection on sort of how the pandemic has sort of affected students, it really highlighted which students had been fully embedded in their program of study and in the student body, and where that hadn't happened. Because for students who had built long-lasting friendships that were, had moved outside of campus, those were sustained over the pandemic. And for students who had built, who had opportunities to be fully embedded in clubs or student societies or other sort of student-led parts of campus, those were sustained because university students found ways to stay in touch with each other, right? There were all of these things popping up. But students only had access to those things if they had sort of previously built those relationships. So I think, it highlighted both ways in which being a university sort of safeguarded some students from, isolation that could have been a lot more extreme over the pandemic, but also highlighted where we need to be focusing more on how our students building those relationships that aren't just tertiary and on campus.
Thank you. Up next, we have Lisa.
Hi. So a couple things come to mind when I think about COVID and how that's created lots of stuff. I don't even think I can pinpoint it. And I think about those relationships. A couple things come to mind. One, the reentry. Some of the feedback that I've received is the reentry into these social aspects on campus. I feel like it has been kind of renewed that fear. They've gotten quite comfortable and feeling safe in their homes. And when it was said out loud, I thought, oh my goodness, what will that reentry look like? What do I need to do? How do I need to approach it? How do I include the student? Lots of questions came to mind. And then I started thinking about, much like what you had mentioned, Rachel, was about how, virtually it's difficult to kind of read the body language and really get a good sense of that individualism that happens when we're always in this virtual atmosphere. It really made me put a lot of emphasis on that relationship building in that context. How do you engage? Like, instead of the barrier of I think and then describing the situation, it was like, okay, so what are we going to do to get out of that? What weren't you sure about? What do you need to ask questions about? So even we've had lots of opportunity to be able to re-enter the students in that relationship building and those skills and that coping, because the virtual piece of this and the texting, it's not going anywhere. We all know that. So my approach was, okay, now that I know that it exists, what do we need to do to build those skills, rather than thinking that if, like Charmaine had mentioned, if we're lucky and we get back to normal, because I think the virtual way of learning is going to be quite, I don't think it's going anywhere. But at the same time, we want to be able to give the students the skills so that way it doesn't matter whether it's virtual or it's in person, that we've given them some tools. We've given them tools in order to work through them and build those relationships. And for some, maybe it is the comfort of texting and virtual, right? And then that's the building the confidence piece, so that way they can get into the on-campus stuff, and that reentry can be fit to their needs and their comfort level. But I think everybody had some really great points, so thank you.
Yeah, just to jump in there again, I think one thing that we really noticed, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, was, it was really quick here in BC. It was sort of March of last year, and we heard rumblings of campus closures, but it was hard to know at that time if that was just sort of word of mouth stuff or if it was really going to happen. And then we had a week of like, okay, campus is closing next week for most campuses. A couple stayed open a little bit longer, but it was for the vast majority of universities here. But for students who had already been using Zoom in their classes, maybe for group work, and had opportunities to use that technology, and even just having that week to get kind of familiar with it. And some students had chosen to go to online meetings with us, a couple of weeks previous to that, just due to their own worries around the pandemic and where it was going. But students who had that opportunity to sort of be introduced to that technology early had a lot easier transition into online learning. And there were some examples of students actually being the ones to troubleshoot some of the Zoom tech issues at the very beginning and send friends in their classes the link because it wasn't working, and be the ones to set up those sort of virtual Zoom, game nights with their friends sort of on or off campus. So yeah, just how much that really benefited students. And so to be being mindful of, okay, if this is going to stay online, what are all of those tools that all young people are utilizing right now to stay connected, that we can sort of make sure students are looped into, so that they can be the ones engaging in the same ways as their peers.
Arjun just has a comment in the chat here, and sorry if you can hear the lawnmower, they're doing yard work outside my apartment right now. But she says, in Alberta, what changes have you made in the day-to-day work to start to prioritize relationships above other focuses for facilitation? Does this look the same in new initiatives and ones that have been established for many years? It's a great 2 questions to put out. So I'll leave that to folks if anyone wants to join in on that.
Shauna or Madeline, sorry, do you guys want to take a crack at it first? You could rock, paper, scissors over it.
I guess it's a good question. I guess I need more time to think about it, but I think when we first started thinking about prioritizing relationships, it was helpful just to like make that part of the conversation, and then in each area that you would be supporting a student, think about what's the opportunity for relationships here. So if whether that's the online school, whether that's a job, whether that's the Zoom workouts with classmates, thinking about how can you take the relationship to the next level? What would it mean, or how would like someone demonstrate that it's a genuine relationship, not just by chatting on the Zoom class, but maybe meeting for a walk with masks on, or kind of like leveling up the thought around that, and how can we support students and classmates to think about yeah, kind of what's the next step in the relationship, I guess. But I think the change was really to make that part of like weekly, daily conversation. Let's prioritize it by talking about it, I think was the first thing. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add a little bit there too. I think lots of the families we work with who really saw the value in going to post-secondary and maybe were a bit more academic focused, you know, when things went virtual and shifted, I think families were able to see the importance of relationships too. And we were able to highlight that when we were meeting with families. And so I think that allowed for like parents and siblings to understand the importance of those connections that are made at post-secondary, and maybe prioritize that piece a little bit too, or think about, you know, outside of our support or on evenings and weekends, how can they support their family member to make those connections or deepen their relationships there too.
And I think maybe I can just add one more piece also. In some instances, we were providing direct support to students in their homes, depending on, you know, what they needed to be able to be successful through the last year. And I think, you know, being really intentional about finding those kind of spaces or opportunities within the ways we're supporting students, as Madeline had mentioned, we're at a real risk of becoming companions. And so again, thinking about if we aren't prioritizing relationships, and we know that it is naturally a time where people are incredibly lonely and overwhelmed, we just had to be very vigilant about not falling into that role and taking up space for friendships from classmates or coworkers or other people.
I'm not seeing anyone currently with any of the little asterisks. I don't actually know the plural of that word. I should probably learn it in the chat there. So I might actually throw it to Mary, because I know she had some thoughts she wanted to discuss at some point around some provincial work.
Yeah, and I think we can go in that direction for sure around advice of or recommendations around, you know, like the importance of, and some recommendations around establishing our network in Nova Scotia. And it's interesting as you reflect on relationships, I'm like, oh yeah, relationships are key to establishing our network so that the universities feel connected to each other, or that the coordinators feel connected to each other. I know Charmaine has invited us to be part of some of the Alberta workshops, and that has been really great at feeling like we're part of something that's more than just our individual universities. So there's that piece. The other piece that I keep thinking about around relationship is that as a faculty member, I'm thinking about relationships a lot for all of my students, no matter what their positionality is, and wondering if there's if and where you talk about universal design for learning and advocacy to the institution at large around how to make classrooms and education more inclusive spaces for all students that would benefit inclusive post-secondary as well. Just wondering if there's any work that the facilitators do as part of their positions, or who's doing that work, or if anyone is doing that work. Or is that the role of the network? Like why we need to have this provincial body that's looking at these things.
Carmen, one of our facilitators, and I presented about inclusive post-secondary at a UDI conference just before the pandemic kind of hit. So about almost 2 years ago, oh man, a year and a half ago. And it was really interesting. I think something I've just sort of noticed upon sort of observation of classrooms is that when profs have sort of ideas of universal design for learning in their classrooms, certainly makes the job of the facilitator a lot easier. Those tend to be the classrooms where we see at the initiatives in BC, it's often the facilitators sort of doing the modification, often sort of in collaboration with the professors generally, but in UDI classrooms where profs are really dedicated to that, we see profs really wanting to take the lead on that, or no need for modification because it's that flexibility in what the assignment looks like is built into the structure of the course. But in terms of have we sort of taken any kind of movement towards recommending that particular educational structure to profs in campuses where we're at, I don't think we're there, but I've definitely noticed a benefit for sure.
Jacqueline, go ahead.
Hi, and my little dog is in the background barking. I apologize. But I was just going to mention that we did have a university teaching program in the summer, and I actually presented at that on UDL, just especially it was around like moving to online and that sort of thing. So I do think that that's one of the things that moving to online sort of gave us at least that opportunity to start bringing forth a little bit about UDL, you know, how to do online, maybe in a better way than had been done previously, things like that. So there is that. Sometimes there's an opportunity in all of this.
Shauna?
Thanks. Here in Alberta, some of the post-secondary institutes we work with also have offices of teaching and learning or centers for faculty advancement. And we found that's been a really helpful place to build relationships where they're already doing faculty development for instructors and professors. They've allowed us to join in some of their presentations, and we've also used that as an avenue to do some workshops for faculty about making their course designs a little bit more inclusive, and we've had a chance to present on UDL there as well. So that would be maybe a piece of advice, is to look and see if that is offered at your own respective institute.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Connie?
Thank you. It makes me a little bit smile that Mary asked that question, because we have, so the Nova Scotia context is a little bit different, because we actually have a big movement right now to make UDL as a part, like basically a standard in universities. So there's a commission, and I'm part of that one, that creates standards for access to learning. Like we have the Accessibility Act in Nova Scotia demands for accessibility by 2030 in all areas, and education is obviously one of them. And so UDL is becoming a big part of the conversation, and there's currently also a university and post-secondary working group that implements EDIA, culturally responsive pedagogy, and universal design for learning for all universities. Now, having said that, obviously the implementation, getting all faculty on that page is going to be a really big issue. But at the same time, so there is a movement that is happening and a strong encouragement. Maybe even, I don't know, in terms of future hiring, asking people, faculty, to actually be able to apply those principles in their work. So so there's a lot of like training and stuff like that happening, and I'm suspecting that it will make some of the job easier in terms of having students from IPSE joining those classes. Yeah, so it's like we, and as just the speaker before me said, yes, we have also the teaching and learning centers that are obviously already attuned to that and trying to promote that as well. Now, obviously, faculty resistance might be a little bit of a different story in all of this, but yeah, it's so there's some stuff on the go. There's a lot of interesting things happening in terms of accessibility right now in Nova Scotia.
And Arden.
Hi, I think I would just repeat the importance of what Shauna said of really, if we're doing this, to do it through the pathways that already exist for professors to learn about how to teach and learn in their schools. I know one emphasis that has always been top of mind in BC is not being seen as experts, and really supporting professors to see their own abilities and capabilities of creating inclusive classrooms, so that they're not like, people can sort of say, oh, I'd love to do this, but I don't have the training. And so often that's a trap that people fall into, that puts up barriers to people with disabilities being seen as learners like anybody else. So I think, like, as we're thinking about how do we resource professors to have inclusive classrooms, we have to keep that in mind, because if we become seen as experts on how to do it, we miss out on all of the ways that professors will come up to do it. And then also really being, like Anne talked about, codified language and being discerning, because now this language is out there about equity, diversity, and inclusion and UDL, but how much do people really understand it or use it? So I think those are just like two traps that we could fall into as facilitators, as a professor saying, oh, I do UDL, I don't need any modifications, thanks, I've got it. But what does that actually mean, and how does it influence the experience of the student that we're supporting, I think is important to think about.
Awesome, thank you for sharing that. Unfortunately, I think we have to start wrapping up about now. But thank you folks so much. Those were really wonderful conversations. I think I speak for most of us in this room that I wish I could go on longer, because there's always so much wisdom and experience that everyone's bringing to the table. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for their participation. This was such an incredible opportunity. And I will take some time today or tomorrow to download those Jamboards. So folks who want to be able to go back and refer to it will be able to. And Arden, you're okay with sending those out, correct? Okay, perfect. So Arden will get those all out to you once I send them to her. I just want to say that I really appreciate and value all that everyone shared with us today. You all bring so much valuable insight, regardless of what your background or experience in this area is. And if you hadn't joined and shared those, we wouldn't have gotten to hear those perspectives today. So thank you for bringing those forward. And thank you again to Arden for giving us this wonderful opportunity. I think I can speak for all of us in Nova Scotia that we really believe in the value of these pan-Canadian collaborations and conversations. And I hope that we're able to keep this going moving forward. With that, I'm going to pass it just to the other Nova Scotia facilitators really quick to see if they've anything they want to add on before we wrap it up and hand it back to Arden.
Just thank you, and a big thank you to our note takers, their students, and recent graduates from community development. So big thank you to you all for taking the time to do it. And thanks everyone for your insights.